I'm Rachel Miller, 32 years old, the forgotten daughter of the Miller family. In this house, wealth decides worth, and I was always the one who came up short. My sister Olivia was groomed as the heir, polished and praised, while I was treated as the mistake they'd rather erase. I still remember the night in my father's study when my chance to prove myself was stolen and presented as hers. That was the night I understood. Betrayal here isn't an accident. It's tradition. Ever been erased from your own family story? Hit like if you've ever been treated as less. Comment if you know what it's like to be laughed at for simply existing. All those memories came rushing back the moment I pulled up in my battered Toyota, staring at the glittering cars in the Miller driveway, summoning the courage to step inside for Thanksgiving. The air outside the Miller estate carried the faint scent of pine and roasted turkey, and the chill of late November nipped at my cheeks as I cut the engine. A line of gleaming luxury cars, sleek black sedans, silver convertibles. Even a limited edition Porsche glittered under the driveway lights. My old Toyota, its paint chipped and its muffler sighing with exhaustion, looked like a trespasser among royalty. For a moment I sat still, fingers tightening on the steering wheel, summoning the courage to face another round of humiliation. Thanksgiving, at least for my family, had never been about gratitude. It was an annual battlefield of wealth and pride, and I had always been conscripted as the enemy. I stepped out, forcing my coat tighter around me, my boots crunching against the gravel. Through the arched windows of the estate, I could already see silhouettes moving gracefully in designer gowns and tailored suits, glasses of wine catching the light like jewels. The house itself seemed to hum with indulgence. Every year it was the same, my relatives arriving in a parade of wealth, basking in admiration, while I walked in carrying only my resolve. The heavy oak door opened before I could reach for the handle. Brandon, my cousin, emerged with a grin too polished to be genuine. His eyes flickered past me toward my car, and the smirk that followed was sharp enough to cut. "Didn't realize Toyota had a vintage collection," he said lightly, as though it were a harmless joke. But his voice carried just enough for the others in the foyer to hear. A few chuckles rose, muffled but deliberate, pricking my skin like needles. Inside, the warmth was overwhelming, firelight spilling across Persian rugs, chandeliers glowing above long mahogany tables already set with crystal and porcelain. The Miller estate never missed an opportunity to flaunt its grandeur. Olivia stood in the center of the foyer like a queen returning to her court, wrapped in a fitted dress that shimmered with understated elegance. She didn't see me at first, or pretended not to, basking in the chorus of warm greetings. "Olivia, you look stunning," Sophie gushed, kissing her cheek. Edward, our father, beamed proudly at her side. When I finally crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The warmth seemed to retract. My mother, Margaret, glanced at me, her smile brittle. "Rachel," she said, as though the syllables themselves were heavy. No embrace, no kiss on the cheek, just acknowledgement curt and thin. Around me, voices dimmed to polite murmurs before rising again, careful not to linger on my arrival. Edward's booming voice filled the room. "You should have heard the news. Olivia has been promoted to senior partner. At her age, remarkable, truly." His eyes sparkled with pride, and he gestured broadly toward her, as though presenting a prize stallion. Applause broke out, laughter following, glasses raised in toast. No one looked at me, though I stood there, a frozen shadow in the midst of their celebration. I tried to steady my breath, to remind myself that I had survived this ritual for years. Still, the words clanged in my chest like hollow bells. I thought back to nights of silent struggle, to years of scraping rent together, to the way their approval had always been measured in assets and titles. Gratitude had no place in this house. Success was the only language they spoke, and I had always been illiterate. Margaret drifted closer, her pearls catching the light. Her smile was gentle, sweet even, but the sweetness was dipped in poison. She leaned in just enough for others to hear, her voice calm, deliberate. "Not everyone is meant for big things, Rachel." The sentence slid into me like a blade wrapped in silk. The sting wasn't new, but it still burned. My jaw tightened, and I fought the instinct to lash out, to defend myself, to expose the cracks in their fragile illusion of superiority. But I swallowed the words, as I always had, tucking the pain deep inside. Olivia turned toward me at last, her eyes sweeping over my coat, my shoes, the wear on my hands. Her lips curved slowly, confidently, as though she had saved the cruelest cut for last. "Still driving that Toyota?" They thought I had forgotten. but betrayal has a way of carving itself into memory. Olivia's smirk, her words about my Toyota, were nothing more than a spark on tinder enough to summon back the firestorm of years past. The laughter in the dining hall blurred, replaced by the dark-paneled walls of my father's study 8 years ago, where the beginning of my estrangement had been written like a curse. It was 2015, and I was still naive enough to think family could be a place of safety. I had spent weeks refining my pitch, nights bent over notebooks, days researching trends, coding until my eyes burned. The idea was simple but revolutionary, a platform that connected small retailers to online marketplaces without the crushing fees of the tech giants. I had run models, drafted prototypes. For the first time in my life, I believed I had something undeniable. I remember walking into Edward's study with trembling hands but steady conviction. The smell of leather and aged whiskey filled the room, the fireplace crackling. My parents sat side by side, Edward with his ever-present glass of scotch, Margaret perfectly composed with her pearls and tea. Olivia lounged on the chaise in the corner, feigning disinterest but watching me with sharp eyes. I began to speak haltingly at first, then with rising confidence. Words spilled out about market gaps, scalability, partnerships I had already probed. I laid out revenue projections on the polished mahogany desk, my notes trembling only when Edward's gaze bore into me. But for once, I felt proud, bold even. This was my moment. And then Olivia spoke. "Actually," she said smoothly, "that's quite an idea. But I think what Rachel means is a broader platform, one that scales internationally, with strong legal protections from the start." She lifted my notes, scanned them as though she had written them, and with a practiced smile reframed my entire pitch in her own cadence. She polished away my stumbles, inserted phrases she knew father would approve of. Within minutes, the idea no longer belonged to me. It was hers, coded in her confidence, dressed in her authority. Edward's face lit up, the way it never had for me. "Brilliant, Olivia! That's the kind of thinking this family needs. Ambition, strategy. You've always had it." My heart thundered. "But those are my notes, my research. Rachel," Edward snapped, the sharp crack of his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Enough. You embarrass this family with your childish dreams. Do you think innovation comes from daydreams and coffee-fueled scribbles? Olivia understands vision. You live in fantasy." The words slammed into me with such force I thought I might collapse. Margaret did not defend me. She merely sipped her tea and glanced away, as if my humiliation was nothing but an awkward interruption. Olivia met my eyes and smiled faintly, a victor savoring her conquest. In that moment, something broke inside me. Whatever thread had bound me to them unraveled completely. I left the study without another word, my notes clutched to my chest like scraps of a stolen life. Behind me, I heard Edward's laughter and Olivia's measured tone weaving my idea into her future. That was the night I understood. In this family, betrayal wasn't an accident. It was tradition. The memories snapped back into the present with brutal clarity. The dining room glittered with golden light, laughter, the clink of silverware. Olivia, older now, but no less triumphant, raised her glass high above the table, her eyes cutting toward me with deliberate precision. "To true success." Every toast feels like a blade turned in my chest. The crystal stemware glitters under chandelier light, raised again and again in celebration of achievements that are not mine. I sip from my glass, the wine rich and sharp on my tongue, but it does nothing to dull the sting of their voices. Around the grand dining table, the Miller family has mastered the art of carving me out of the picture, one polished remark at a time. The turkey, golden and steaming, rests at the center like a trophy. Bowls of truffle mashed potatoes and saffron rice are passed with graceful hands, the table set like a magazine spread. Yet the atmosphere is less about gratitude than it is about exhibition. Each smile conceals sharpness. Each toast is an opportunity to prove worth. Olivia's words, "to true success," still hang in the air, echoing father's old condemnation from years ago. It's uncanny how they've all learned to recycle his beliefs, turning them into doctrine. Brandon leans forward, his Rolex catching the light, his voice deliberately booming so no one misses a syllable. "Closed a $50 million deal last quarter. Hedge funds are volatile, but if you know how to move, you control the storm." He chuckles, pleased with himself, his eyes darting toward me just long enough to ensure I feel the weight of his triumph. Edward claps him on the back. Margaret's eyes shine with approval, and Olivia's smirk broadens as though Brandon's success reflects her own. I focus on cutting a piece of turkey, small and neat, pretending the metallic taste in my mouth is just from the knife scraping porcelain. But Sophie, always eager to join the chorus, turns her attention on me. "Rachel," she says, tilting her head with mock concern, "have you considered hiring a financial advisor? Someone who could help you maximize whatever little income you've got? It would be such a shame to let it all slip through your fingers." The table laughs softly, polite chuckles cloaked in feigned kindness. My pulse hammers in my ears, but I keep my face impassive. I learned long ago that outrage only feeds them. Still, each word cuts deeper, layering insult over insult. Margaret reaches across with her practiced smile, a smile designed to soothe but sharpen at once. "Darling, you've always been so practical. Not everyone can chase empires, and that's all right. You have a steady way of living, and we admire that." The word practical drips with condescension, the way one might praise a child for drawing inside the lines while dismissing the art entirely. I lay down my fork, my voice calm, almost too soft for the clamor of silverware and laughter. Sometimes practicality builds empires. For a fleeting moment, silence ripples across the table. Then the laughter erupts louder than before, rolling like a wave of dismissal. Brandon throws his head back. Sophie covers her mouth but fails to hide her grin, and even Edward allows himself a smirk. Their amusement stabs more deeply than their scorn. It tells me they never expect me to rise above this role they've cast for me. My chest tightens, but beneath the pain is something else, something steady, simmering. Let them laugh. They don't know what I've been building. They don't know what I've hidden. Beneath the table, where no one can see, my phone buzzes. I glance down, shielding the screen from prying eyes. A new message glows against the dark. "It's done. They won't see this coming. Daniel." The only voices that mattered weren't at this table. Their laughter rolled behind me like a cruel tide as I slipped through the French doors and out onto the balcony, the November air biting my cheeks with welcome sharpness. Out here, the night was still, broken only by the faint hum of traffic beyond the Miller estate gates. I exhaled, letting the cool air settle over my skin, as though it could wash away the sting of their mockery. Inside, they were still clinking glasses, bragging about fortunes that meant little beyond performance. But beyond these walls, beyond their suffocating orbit, there were voices I trusted. Daniel's text burned in my pocket. "It's done. They won't see this coming." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a steady, rising calm. I let the message linger on my screen, the glowing letters a reminder of what we had planned for years. Daniel had been the first to see through the Miller facade, the first to take me seriously, when my own blood had shredded my confidence. Memory tugged me back to one of our late-night conversations, his voice low and deliberate over the phone. "Stay patient, Rach. Timing is everything. They thrive on making you feel small, but they'll never see you until it's too late. And when they do, it won't be mockery. It'll be awe. Trust me." His faith had kept me steady through nights when bitterness threatened to devour me. I could still picture the way he leaned forward across cafe tables, his hands folded, eyes sharp with determination. "Patience is power," he had said, again and again, like a mantra. The phone buzzed again, jolting me from the memory. This time it was Angela. "Bids almost confirmed. Just need the final signature. Numbers are clean. Timing couldn't be better." I drew in a slow breath, fingers tightening around the railing. Below, the estate gardens spread like a manicured kingdom, each trimmed hedge and fountain a testament to wealth they believed untouchable. They had no idea those walls of privilege were about to crack. I typed quickly, "Hold. Not tonight. Let them laugh. Let them feel untouchable one last time." Angela's reply came almost instantly. "Understood. Press conference ready. Awaiting your signal." My reflection in the glass door caught my eyes steadier, stronger than the girl who once walked out of Edward's study in silence. I touched the screen, locking it, feeling the weight of secrets I carried. There was satisfaction in restraint, in knowing the power I held was invisible to them for now. They saw only the battered Toyota, the practical daughter, the failure at their golden table. Let them. Every second they underestimated me. My advantage grew. I turned back toward the dining hall, where the glitter of chandeliers cast halos over faces that had never known humility. Olivia's voice rose above the chatter just as I stepped inside, sharp enough to slice through the air. "Are you even dating anyone successfully? Nothing more shocking than being erased from your own bloodline." The words formed silently in my mind as I watched the empty dessert plates cleared away, the silver cutlery clinking softly against porcelain. The wine kept flowing, ruby liquid swirling into tall crystal glasses, loosening tongues that didn't need any more encouragement. The dining room had grown warmer, laughter heavier, the atmosphere thick with pride and wealth. I sat among them, invisible in plain sight, my glass half full, my patience half stretched. Edward, at the head of the table, tapped his glass with a spoon. The room stilled instantly, every pair of eyes turning toward him with reverence. His voice carried the polished authority of a man used to commanding attention. This year has been remarkable for the Miller family. Our legacy continues to grow stronger, and I am proud to see the younger generation carrying it forward. He gestured to Olivia and Brandon, who beamed as though spotlighted. He launched into an explanation of the family trust fund, his words thick with pride. He spoke of Olivia's innovative ventures, of Brandon's financial acumen, of Sophie's social connections that elevated the family's profile. Each compliment was wrapped like a prize, gift wrapped in praise. I listened, my knuckles tight around the stem of my glass. He never even glanced at me. The truth was subtle, almost carefully crafted my absence in his list of heirs, his omission of my name as if it had been scrubbed from the ledger. But the subtlety wasn't lost on me. It was deliberate. And I remembered the day the erasure had become real. Olivia leaned forward, her voice light but venomous. "Face it, Rachel. You were never meant to be part of our legacy." Her smile lingered like a knife twisted for effect. Brandon snorted under his breath. Sophie exchanged a smug glance with Margaret, and Edward nodded in grave agreement, as if Olivia had voiced an eternal truth. The wine soured in my mouth. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from the deep ache of memory. Years ago, I had sat in Edward's study, papers spread across the mahogany desk, listening as his lawyer explained the restructuring of the family trust. I was 22, full of ideas, hopeful for acknowledgement. Edward's words that day were cold and final. "Your choices don't align with the Miller legacy. We cannot afford liabilities." I had signed nothing. There was nothing to sign. They had cut me out cleanly, surgically, like trimming a diseased branch from a tree. I had walked out of that room feeling like I had lost more than money. I had lost place, name, blood. I stared at Olivia now, her laughter chiming like glass shards. Her words echoed Edward's disdain from years past, a perfect echo of his judgment. They thought I had been erased, and perhaps in their ledger I had. But what they didn't know, what they would never see coming, was how completely I had rewritten my story without them. My phone vibrated against my thigh, steady and insistent. I glanced down beneath the table. The name glowed against the screen. Angela calling. Every laugh was a dagger wrapped in silk. The dining room shimmered with golden light from the chandelier overhead, reflections dancing across polished silverware and glinting glasses. The table had been reset for the main course, roasted turkey carved beside bowls of cranberry sauce, steaming vegetables, and buttery rolls. Yet the warmth of the feast only seemed to amplify the coldness directed at me. Around me, voices rose in competition, each anecdote sharper, each boast louder, every laugh landing on my skin like a hidden blade. I remembered Olivia's words from earlier, the way she had leaned in, eyes glinting, declaring I was never part of the family legacy. The cruelty hadn't just been in the words, it had been in the way the entire table received them, not with shock, but with a casual acceptance, as though she were merely stating the weather. And now, as the plates filled again, the taunting sharpened. Olivia set her glass down with a flourish. "I finally closed on my Manhattan apartment," she announced, her voice thick with pride. "Upper East Side, 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the park. The realtor said it was a steal, but really, some things you just can't put a price on." She let her words hang, waiting for admiration. The family did not disappoint. Edward nodded approvingly, Margaret's lips curved into a smile, and Brandon clinked his glass toward her. I sat quietly, cutting into my turkey, the taste bland in my mouth. Then Brandon turned his attention to me, his grin wide and cruel. "You're still renting, right, Rachel?" His voice dripped with false innocence, but the glint in his eyes betrayed the intent. The table chuckled. Even Helen hid a smirk behind her napkin. Margaret sighed, her tone soft but barbed. "Not everyone is meant for big things." She gave me the kind of pitying smile reserved for strangers in line at the supermarket, the sort of look that belittled while pretending to sympathize. The words landed, heavy and humiliating, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the silence stretch, their laughter echoing. My fork tapped against the china, steady as a metronome. Finally, I looked up, meeting Margaret's gaze with evenness. Sometimes small steps build empires. The words came out calm, controlled. For the first time all evening, I wasn't shrinking, I was striking. The laughter that erupted was louder than before, almost relieved. They didn't understand, couldn't imagine, that those small steps they mocked had already built more than they would ever guess. Brandon nearly choked on his wine. Olivia leaned back in her chair, smirking, and Margaret dabbed delicately at the corner of her mouth with a napkin as if my words were nothing more than an amusing trifle. Inside, however, something shifted. I felt it like a spark catching flame, a reminder that I wasn't just surviving this dinner, I was preparing for the inevitable reckoning. Their ridicule no longer cut the same way. It hardened me, shaped me, reminded me why I had waited. Then, as their laughter still echoed around the table, my phone vibrated beneath the linen. A sharp, steady buzz. I slid it out just far enough to see the screen light up. Angela. Bid confirmed. Press team ready. They mistook my silence for surrender. The living room was a theater of glass and velvet-polished oak cabinets lined with bottles of imported scotch, velvet chairs arranged like thrones, a grand piano in the corner that no one touched anymore. After dinner, the family sprawled there with practiced ease, drinks in hand, their laughter softened by the expensive rug underfoot. It was a room designed to celebrate winners, to enshrine their triumphs. To them, I was merely an intruder, tolerated because bloodline demanded it. I carried my glass of sparkling water and sat at the edge of a leather armchair, their voices swelling around me like an oppressive tide. I recalled Angela's message, Bid confirmed. Press team ready. The words hummed beneath my skin, steady and electric, though no one else could hear the pulse of that secret victory waiting to be unleashed. Helen, ever the mediator in appearances only, leaned forward with a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. Family helps each other, she said sweetly, pausing for effect. Unless, of course, someone refuses to fit in. Her gaze rested on me, soft as silk and just as suffocating. Edward swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his posture authoritative even in leisure. Rachel, he said, his voice threaded with disappointment disguised as care, why not settle for a modest career? Something steady. It suits you. Chasing grand ideas has only brought you shame. The others murmured their agreement, the sound of compliance disguised as wisdom. Olivia, as always, delivered the cutting edge. She leaned back against the couch, crossed her legs with deliberate elegance, and smirked. Maybe Rachel's assistant earns more than she does, she said, laughter bubbling from her throat, sharp and crystalline. The family chuckled, delighted at the jab. Their words pressed in from every side, a suffocating wall of dismissal and mockery. Yet inside I felt no collapse, no faltering. Instead, a heat rose within me, not of shame, but of certainty. They couldn't fathom the truth that the assistant they mocked was part of something greater, that the game they thought they had already won hadn't even truly begun. I let the silence linger, the corners of my mouth curving into a restrained, quiet smile. I met Olivia's eyes, my voice calm, steady, tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Funny you mentioned my assistant. The words hung there, heavier than they should have been. Olivia's smirk faltered for the briefest second, confusion flickering in her gaze. Helen shifted in her seat. Edward frowned as though I had spoken in a language they didn't understand. They had no idea what I had set in motion, no inkling of how close they were to seeing their empire crack. On the coffee table, my phone vibrated against the polished wood, the screen lighting up in the dim room. Angela, her name glowing bright, waiting, relentless. I was a guest in the house that should have been mine. The Miller Estate's garden patio spread out like a magazine cover, perfect rows of hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives, lanterns glowing in soft amber arcs along the stone balustrades, a fire pit crackling gently in the center. Beyond, the ocean shimmered faintly under the November moon, as if reminding me that everything here belonged to them and not to me. The marble-top tables were littered with glasses of single malt whiskey, the kind aged longer than I had been alive, when the Millers first bought their way into high society. The air smelled of cedar and smoke, tinged with the sharp bite of arrogance. Brandon leaned against the wrought iron railing, his blazer draped casually over his shoulders, his whiskey glass tilted like a trophy. So, he drawled, voice loud enough to fill the night. The membership at the Westchester Elite finally came through. Took years of networking, but worth every penny. Not everyone can swing their way into the finest golf course in the Northeast. His grin gleamed as he lifted his glass, inviting admiration. Sophie, perched elegantly on a lounge chair with her legs crossed like a model on display, tilted her head toward me. The firelight reflected in her diamond earrings, tiny specks of light like cold stars. "Rachel," she said with a mock sweetness that hid nothing of the scorn beneath, "do you even belong here? These are conversations for people who actually participate in this world." Her laugh was delicate, rehearsed, as though even her insults deserved applause. The words cut sharper than the chill in the air, but I refused to flinch. I remembered the trust fund disclosure from years before the document that had effectively erased my name, my bloodline, my worth in their eyes. It was more than exclusion, it was erasure. Edward stood nearby, his voice measured, heavy with a judgment that he wielded like a gavel. "This family matters," he said firmly, eyes narrowing at me with a disdain that felt more personal than paternal. "You've chosen poor reputation. You've aligned yourself with small pursuits, small people. Do not mistake stubbornness for strength." His glass clinked against Brandon's in agreement, as though sealing my fate with crystal and amber liquor. The fire pit's flames flickered high, shadows dancing across my face. I let their words hang in the air, let the superiority echo around me like a hollow hymn. Then I fixed my gaze on Edward, unblinking, my voice as cool as the ocean breeze that drifted across the patio. "Sometimes the wrong path leads to the right summit." For a moment, silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the faint crash of waves below. Brandon blinked as if I had spoken in a foreign tongue. Sophie's smirk froze, her glass pausing midair. Edward's brow furrowed, searching for weakness in my expression, and finding none, I didn't look away. I wouldn't. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed against the marble, its vibration a steady, urgent drumbeat. The screen lit up in sharp contrast to the dim garden. Angela's name glowed once more, her final text crisp and waiting. Media waiting. Shall I proceed? One call could end their illusion. The November wind cut against my face as I stepped onto the balcony, the cold night wrapping around me like a cloak of resolve. Below, the ocean murmured against the cliffs, a dark hymn that carried the weight of inevitability. Inside, through the glass doors, the Millers reclined in leather and velvet, their laughter spilling outward like smoke. They thought the evening belonged to them, another Thanksgiving crowned with their triumphs and my humiliation. But the phone in my hand burned with a power they could never imagine. Angela's name glowed bright across the screen. Bid confirmed. Press waiting. 3 simple words, yet they cracked open the veneer of the Miller empire more cleanly than any blade. She had prepared everything, the conference lines, the headlines drafted, the stage where the narrative would flip in front of the world. A second vibration. This time, Daniel. His words came sharp, like flint sparking against stone. "Tonight, let them see who you really are." I stared at the message until my reflection ghosted across the screen, my own face pale in the moonlight. He had always believed more in me than my own bloodline ever could, urging me to be patient, to gather every piece until the moment struck with precision. That moment was now. My thumb hovered over the call button, the world narrowing to the device in my palm. The glass door rattled faintly as laughter rose again from inside, muffled by the barrier but no less cruel. I remembered every jab, every slight, every dismissal, wrapped in velvet tones. Olivia's smirk, Brandon's mockery, Edward's scorn, Margaret's pity. They had rehearsed their roles for years, and I had been their stage prop of failure. Tonight, that theater would collapse. I typed quickly, "Wait for my signal. One call." In front of them. The words steadied my pulse even as adrenaline coursed through me. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. The phone dimmed, and I slipped it back into my clutch. My hands tightened against the railing, knuckles pale under the moonlight. I whispered it aloud, the words a vow carried off by the wind. "It ends tonight." I turned, exhaling the cold air, and walked back into the glow of the living room. The fire snapped in the hearth, glasses clinked, and the room swelled with the confidence of those who had never doubted their place at the top. Olivia rose smoothly, her crystal glass catching the light. She smiled, the kind of smile sharpened over years of practice. "A toast," she declared, her eyes sweeping deliberately across the room before settling on me, "to real success." Their laughter died the moment my phone rang. The sound cut cleanly through the dining hall, a bright, insistent chime against the clinking of crystal and the hum of smug voices. The air had been thick with triumph just seconds earlier, Olivia's voice leading the chorus as she raised her glass, savoring the attention that had always been hers to command. To real success, she had declared, her smirk a dagger wrapped in velvet. Wine glistened in crystal, flames shimmered in the polished silver of the candlesticks, and all eyes had been ready to toast her. Then came the vibration, the piercing ring. My phone lit up against the linen tablecloth, Angela's name bold and glowing in the dim room. I let it buzz once, twice, a third time, the sound lingering like a countdown no one but me could hear. Olivia rolled her eyes with theatrical disdain. Honestly, Rachel, can't you keep your little assistant on hold? We're in the middle of something important. Her laugh rose, expecting the others to follow. But I had already pressed the answer button, my thumb steady, my breath even. I didn't raise the device to my ear. Instead, I placed it flat on the table, speaker engaged, the microphone cutting across the silence like a scalpel. Go ahead, Angela, I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected. Quiet but weighted. There was the briefest pause. Then Angela's voice crisp, confident, resonant, as though she had been rehearsing this moment her entire life. Congratulations, Miss Miller. The board has just confirmed your $3.5 billion winning bid. The acquisition is now officially yours. The words struck like thunder in a cathedral. Silence crashed across the table, so heavy it seemed to crush the air itself. The smirk on Olivia's lips shattered into disbelief. For a second, her hand trembled, and the stem of her wine glass slipped through her fingers. Red wine spilled like blood across the white linen, seeping outward in jagged lines. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed, words failing her for once. Edward's glass hovered in midair, his eyes narrowing as though sheer denial could bend reality back into shape. Brandon blinked furiously, as if trying to process an equation he couldn't solve, while Sophie pressed her napkin against the spreading stain, her diamond bracelet glinting in the candlelight. I didn't move to comfort, didn't move to explain. I only sat back, the firelight catching on the calm curve of my smile. For years they had erased me, dismissed me, written me out of their legacy, as though my very existence were an embarrassment to be scrubbed away. Now their empire of assumptions was crumbling, not with a shout but with a single phone call. Olivia's voice cracked, fragile where it had always been sharp. What are you talking about? But no one answered. Even Angela, professional and precise, let the silence hang, as if savoring the collapse with me. I folded my hands neatly, leaned forward, and let my eyes sweep across each stunned face. My voice was steady, even gentle, but its weight carried into every corner of the room. Now, shall we talk about success? For the first time in years they had no words. The dining hall seemed to shrink around us, the vaulted ceiling suddenly heavy, the chandeliers throwing sharp angles of light across stunned faces. The echo of Angela's announcement still lingered in the air, as if the walls themselves refused to release it. My phone sat on the table, screen dimmed now, but its presence loomed larger than any voice in the room. Olivia's mouth worked uselessly, opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her perfectly rehearsed poise had abandoned her, leaving only a quiver in her jaw. That's not possible, she muttered, her eyes darting toward Brandon as if he might conjure an explanation that would rewrite reality. Brandon only shook his head, his composure unraveling with each passing second. $3.5 billion? That's not… Rachel, you don't… His words collapsed under the weight of disbelief. He pushed back his chair slightly, the legs scraping against the floor, as though physical distance might somehow shield him from the truth, staring him down. Edward leaned forward, his fork clutched in one hand, his knuckles white. His voice, usually the booming command that had silenced boardrooms and dominated family gatherings, cracked under strain. Explain yourself, Rachel, now. Each syllable was clipped, as though control might still be clawed back if he demanded it with enough force. I met his glare with unflinching calm, sliding the phone across the table. The screen flickered awake, illuminating the polished oak with the unmistakable headline, Bloomberg Rachel Miller secures landmark $3.5 billion acquisition. The logo, the words, the undeniable permanence of print, all of it was there, impossible to dismiss as rumor or mistake. Margaret's hand trembled against her glass, the ruby-red wine within trembling with it. Her voice came not as a rebuke, but as a whisper, barely audible over the suffocating silence. Why didn't you tell us? It wasn't accusation. It was something softer, sadder, an admission that she hadn't seen me at all, even when I had been right in front of her. The fork finally slipped from Edward's hand, clattering onto his plate with a metallic finality. The sound rang out like a gavel. Olivia's eyes glistened, though with rage or shame I couldn't tell. Brandon stared at the tablecloth as though it might unravel the secret for him. Even Helen, who so often kept her barbs close to her chest, sat frozen in silence. I let the pause stretch, long enough that the weight of it pressed against their throats. Then, with a coldness honed through years of dismissal and disdain, I answered, "Why didn't you ever listen?" They wanted explanations. I owed them only the truth. The silence that had once seemed impossible in this house still clung to the air, as fragile as spun glass. They had mocked me into submission so many times, demanded proof of my worth, dismissed my every word, but now they demanded an explanation, as though I owed them clarity, as though their shock somehow granted them the right to demand more of me. Olivia was the first to recover her voice, though it trembled with desperation rather than confidence. She laughed, brittle and sharp, the kind of sound that cracked rather than rang. "This doesn't change anything. Anyone can buy into a deal if they find the right backer. You've probably latched onto someone else's vision, Rachel, like you always do." Her eyes flickered nervously, betraying the fear beneath the facade. I leaned forward, sliding my phone across the table once again. This time, it wasn't Bloomberg or Angela's polished voice. It was a chain of emails, preserved for years, buried in folders and backed up where no one could touch them. The subject line glowed with an echo of my past. Miller Family Venture Proposal 2015. "I remember every word of that night," I said softly, almost to myself. "In your study, Father." I sat there, shaking with nerves, and laid out my plan, a tech platform to connect freelancers with global clients, built for accessibility, scale, and sustainability. I thought it would make you proud." Edward's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing as though the memory itched at the back of his mind. I tapped the screen. The email expanded, and there were my words, fresh as the day I had written them. The business model, the projected growth, the branding I had spent months refining. And beneath it, a reply Olivia sent from her sleek device mere hours later, reshaping my words as her own. The same language, the same vision, the same dream stripped of my name. Olivia's face drained of color. "This isn't Rachel. You're twisting this. Stop." My voice cut across hers, sharper than I had ever dared. I turned the screen toward Edward, forcing him to look. She copied me. Every word, every projection, every dream I brought into this family, she stripped from my hands and presented as her own. And you believed her. Edward's hand twitched, his jaw working furiously, as if the foundation of his certainty was buckling beneath him. This can't be true. Olivia wouldn't. But even as he spoke, his voice wavered because the evidence was undeniable. I felt the years of swallowed rage surge through me, filling every corner of my chest until I thought it would burst. My voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the ferocity of truth finally unleashed. "You didn't just steal my idea, you stole my place in this family." The words cracked like thunder, and for a moment no one moved. No one breathed. The chandelier seemed to flicker under the weight of it. Olivia's mask shattered. Her voice broke, high and thin, laced with panic. "That's not how it happened," she cried, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the polished wood. But the damage was done. The truth, buried for 8 long years, now stood naked in the candlelight, undeniable and merciless. I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving in victory. The air in the hallway felt different from the dining room, stripped of the heavy perfume of roast turkey and wine. Out here, there was space, silence except for the muffled echoes of footsteps that followed me, desperate voices bleeding out of the dining hall behind. The chandelier above the grand staircase glimmered in fractured shards of gold, its light catching the dust of a family empire too proud to admit its decay. "Rachel, wait." Margaret's voice cracked, raw and wounded, unlike the carefully composed tones she had always used to chisel me down to size. She stumbled forward, clutching the banister as if it alone kept her upright. Her eyes shone with something that might have been remorse, but the years of her silence had burned away my patience for it. "We're still bleeding," she whispered, her voice carrying the tremor of an old woman who had suddenly realized her fortress had crumbled. I turned just enough to face her, my expression steady, not unkind but immovable. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. The words hung in the air, simple, sharp, undeniable. A truth she could no longer weep her way around. Edward's shadow fell long across the marble floor as he joined her, his jaw locked, eyes dark with the storm of a man watching his authority dissolve. He opened his mouth, perhaps to command me as he always had, but no words came. Olivia lingered behind them, her mascara smeared, lips trembling with rage that could no longer disguise her fear. Brandon and Sophie exchanged a glance from the staircase landing. Their earlier arrogance curdled into something like shame or perhaps envy. The estate doors creaked open, and the cold November air swept in, biting and bracing, carrying the scent of freedom. Outside, headlights cut through the darkness. Angela stepped into the doorway, her presence a deliberate contrast to the hollow grandeur inside. Her heels clicked against the stone, her eyes fixed on me with quiet certainty. "Car's ready," she said softly, her tone both professional and intimate, the voice of someone who had believed in me when no one else had. For a moment I stood in the liminal space between two worlds, the gilded prison that had denied me for years and the open night beyond, alive with the promise of the empire I had built for myself. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their disbelief, their pleading, their loss. I drew a slow breath, savoring the moment, then turned to them one last time. "Success isn't about what you own, it's about what you build." The words rang through the hallway like a verdict, final and irrevocable. Angela's hand brushed the door wider. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, each stride a declaration. The night air wrapped around me, sharp and liberating, while behind me the Millers stood frozen, helpless, watching the daughter they had cast aside claim a future they could never control. And then the door shut, the sound echoing like the seal of destiny. Hay sent messages. I sent silence. For a week straight, my phone had been buzzing like an old alarm clock, with a dying battery, relentless, grating, impossible to ignore if I hadn't already mastered the art of indifference. Olivia's frantic texts, Brandon's half apologies, Margaret's long-winded emails heavy with pleas for family unity. Even Edward had tried, his clipped sentences revealing a man reduced from patriarch to beggar. I let each notification pile up like autumn leaves gathering on a cold sidewalk. Not a single reply left my fingertips. Silence was its own answer, sharper than any rebuke. Now, standing inside the glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of my Manhattan high-rise, I could feel the pulse of a different world. A wall of cameras blinked like restless eyes, waiting for me to speak. The skyline stretched behind me, steel and light colliding. The city that had once felt indifferent, now bowing to acknowledge what I had built. The banner projected on the screen behind me read in bold letters, "The billionaire who was called poor." Angela stood at my side, calm and efficient, her clipboard balanced against her hip. Daniel lingered just behind the podium, scanning the crowd of reporters with the cool patience of a man who knew every question would only strengthen our story. The press conference began in a storm of flashes and raised hands. I told them about the winning bid, about the merger that had changed my trajectory, but my focus was not on gloating. Instead, I announced something larger, something meant to endure, the Miller Foundation, a scholarship fund for students who, like me once, had ideas but no backing, voices but no audience. "Legacies aren't inherited," I said, my voice carrying through the room like a steady drumbeat. "They're created." Behind the cameras, Angela's phone vibrated again. She leaned in, whispering, "Another email from your father. He says they want to meet." I looked at her, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "Block them all." Her eyes gleamed with approval as she tapped the command into her device. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift completely, the invisible leash of their judgment snapping away into nothing. Reporters scribbled notes, recording every phrase, but the climax was not for them, it was for me. After the applause, after the flashes, after the staged questions, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and let my gaze roam across the city, the expanse of rooftops and bridges, the rivers threading silver through the dark. The world was wider than their estate, richer than their inheritance, truer than their empty approval. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong," I whispered, my reflection merging with the skyline. "It's proving yourself right." The words weren't aimed at them anymore. They were a vow to myself, a seal on the life I had chosen and built. The door clicked open, and Daniel stepped to my side. His tone was even, but I caught the edge of excitement in it. "Tokyo expansion is ready. The partners are waiting for your green light." I turned to him, the glow of the city painting his features with promise. A new chapter loomed, not bound to bloodlines or betrayals, but to the empire I was determined to keep growing. Behind us, the room emptied, the cameras were packed away, and the press dispersed into the cold Manhattan night. Ahead, the horizon stretched limitless. And as the silence settled, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was freedom. It was power. It was the sound of a summit reached and the beginning of the climb to the next. The silence that once marked her exclusion became the very sound of her triumph, echoing through skyscraper glass and headlines alike. Betrayal had been unmasked, and with it came the reminder that injustice may fester in shadows, but it cannot withstand the light of truth. When courage refuses to bow, even the deepest wounds are rewritten into legacies of strength. Like a verdict long delayed yet impossible to overturn, justice arrived unyielding, undeniable, unforgettable. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. So if you felt the power of this journey, like, share, and subscribe. Then comment 1 if you resonate with Rachel's fight, or 2 if you feel the story left you wanting more.